Welcome to the Macomb Center for Performing Arts at Macomb Community College. I'm Jim Sawyer. I have the honor of being president of the college. We're very pleased to present an extraordinary opportunity to you this evening, and it's really made possible through our James Jacobs Civic Engagement Project. The project was created to bring nationally recognized experts to Macomb County to facilitate dialogue about issues that are important in our region and our community. This wouldn't be possible without the generous support of the J.P. Morgan Chase and Company and the Kresge Foundation. We're pleased to be joined tonight by Carolyn Altman-Smith from the Kresge Foundation. Caroline, I'm not sure where you are, and I'd like you to join me in recognizing both Caroline and Kresge, as well as J.P. Morgan Chase. So this afternoon we had a great event. Our speakers met with a group of students. We probably had about 100, 125 students in there, and it was an opportunity for students to come in and ask questions. And I have to tell you, I was very impressed that there were many questions from the students. We really weren't even able to answer all the questions. We ran out of time. And it was really heartening. The questions were very well thought out. And you know, when you reflect on this is a chance for our students. Here they are studying, learning history, but here's a chance to talk to some legendary journalists who actually helped make history. And I think that's just an outstanding opportunity. So we're really pleased to be able to bring that opportunity to our students. This whole project, the James Jacobs Civic Project, was really the vision of our previous president, Jim Jacobs. Jim spent 50 years here at the college in a variety of different roles, which culminated with him serving about 10 years as a president. So please join me in recognizing Jim Jacobs. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our guests. Bob Woodward is associate editor of the Washington Post, where he has worked since 1971. He has shared in 2 Pulitzer Prizes, the first with Carl Bernstein in 1973 for coverage of the Watergate scandal, and the second in 2002 as lead reporter for the Post coverage of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He has written 19 books, with his latest, Fear, Trump in the White House, becoming an international bestseller in the first week. Carl Bernstein is a political analyst for CNN and a contributing editor at Vanity Fair. He has been writing about national and international affairs for more than 40 years. He began his career at age 16 as a copy boy, and he told our students a real good story about how he began his career. He's been an author of 5 best-selling books. He's currently working on several multimedia projects, including a memoir about growing up at the Washington newspaper, The Evening Star, during the Kennedy era, and also a dramatic political TV series for HBO. So we should have an outstanding discussion tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce Paula Tutman. Paula will be serving as our moderator. Paula is a multi-Emmy-winning broadcast journalist with more than 30 years experience, and I'm sure you all know her from serving at Channel 4, our local NBC affiliate. So with that, Paula, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, good evening, good evening to you. So the bottom line is, with the kind of day that we've had today, it is great that you've come here. We know that there are absolutely other places you could have been and probably been safe staying there, but you chose to spend the evening with us, and we're very, very excited about that. When I was asked to do this program, start with when Jeannie Nicole asked if I would moderate a session with the likes of Woodward and Bernstein, or Bernstein and Woodward, my answer was 2 words: yes, please. So I was kind of having this conversation with myself, and I was thinking about icons and titans, right? We have them in absolutely every industry. So if you like comic books, right, it's Black Panther and Superman, right? If you like movies, then it's Spielberg and Scorsese. Titans of industry. We're talking about Sarah Blakely, who did Spanx, right? You have Buffett and Bezos. She's a billionaire, don't laugh. You have Buffett and Bezos, right? We have Oprah and Beyonce. I mean, we've got titans, but when we think about journalism, when we talk about journalists and journalism, the titans for us, the heroes for us, are the likes of Woodward and Bernstein, or Bernstein and Woodward, as I like to say. I mean, these guys are absolutely no slackers. So please welcome to the stage Bob Woodward, legendary Pulitzer Prize winning, multi-best-selling author, and all-around good guy to the stage.
Thank you.
And Carl Bernstein, an equally legendary Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and best-selling author, to the stage. Carl Bernstein. So between these two fellas, we've got a thorn between two roses. Between these two gentlemen, who in more than 50 years have broken incredible stories, including the Watergate scandal, dealing with abuse of power, politics, and presidents. I think I counted somewhere like a grand total of 25 books between you, maybe?
He wrote more than me.
Okay, but to combine.
He's faster.
Combined, okay, so we're talking about combined. Often collaborating when you talk about presidents and power and politics. And so I have to imagine that in the last 2 years, with so little going on in Washington, what the hell have you been doing with your time? I can't imagine that you must be twiddling your thumbs there.
Nothing to do. Time off.
Nothing to do. Just very, very quickly, Carl, you're working on, it looks like a minute or less, you're working on some stuff with HBO. Can you just kind of give us, can you wet our whistle?
It's a dramatic series about Washington with David Simon, who did The Wire. I'm doing a memoir about growing up in this old-fashioned newspaper where I learned pretty much everything I know.
Fiction or nonfiction?
About journalism, except what I learned from Woodward, which is considerable, and what we learned from each other, which is also considerable. And at CNN, I've both reported on and done a lot of commentary about the Trump presidency.
Is this project a fiction or nonfiction?
At HBO?
At HBO.
HBO is fiction.
Well, that's going to be fascinating. That's going to be interesting. Okay, so, and of course you, because you've been twiddling your thumbs, not doing a heck of a lot. And so we're talking about your recent book, Fear, and 400 plus pages of mind-boggling, spellbounding, recreating schedules and conversations and what appears to be really building an administration that seems to have almost started from a thought bubble. You've covered 9 presidents. How is covering this one different, or is it?
Oh. Well, it's what I decided that the Trump presidency, of course, was going to be a pivot point in history. So what really goes on behind the scenes? And there are 3 paths you could take in looking at Trump, all the untruths he tells. My newspaper has calculated 8,411 and still counting. And that's out there. And then you could look at the Mueller special prosecutor investigation, which is very important and serious. I frankly couldn't find anything startlingly new there. And then there's the third path, which is what he does as president in foreign policy, the economy. And there I was able to get the detailed story, documented story from notes and accounts of firsthand witnesses and the documents themselves, that the reality is, whether you like Trump or don't like Trump, we have a governing crisis that is substantial. He bases lots of his decisions on things that are just not true or facts, and that has a tremendous impact on where we are and where we are going.
Which is why I think this conversation is so important when we're talking about the building block of democracy and the role of the free press in America. And I wonder if covering this particular administration has changed your view of journalists or journalism.
Certainly, it's changed my view of the role of journalists to make me even more strongly believe that we in journalism, in reporting, are the essential block that enables democracy to function. And if we don't do it, then systemic failure can occur. And you know, I'm reminded, I don't know how many of you all saw the Super Bowl ad that the Washington Post did the other day. And it says, democracy.
$6 million.
Yeah. Well, democracy dies in darkness. Bob is responsible for that phrase, actually. And that's really where we are in a way, perhaps, that we haven't been before. In Watergate, the system worked. The system functioned. We had the Senate Watergate Committee, in which Republicans with Democrats joined together to find out the truth about Richard Nixon. We have not had a similar bipartisan determination by our political system to deal with Donald Trump and whatever has occurred with the Russians in particular, but other matters as well. And so we have had a lot of darkness because the political system is not working. And yet, what is working, and there are problems with the way it's working, and Bob and I will talk, I'm sure tonight, about some of what we see as excessive problems of tone in what we do sometimes.
We being
in the
journalists.
press, individually and collectively. But I believe that on a daily basis, what we have seen in the reporting of the Trump presidency by the White House press corps, even with all the disadvantages they have of having to report with speed and get out there in front, we've seen the most remarkable reporting on a presidency by the most news organizations of my lifetime. And we can talk about what failures or there have been, but democracy has not gone dark in this presidency, and it might have had it not been for the press. And then on top of that, and we'll talk about this tonight, I hope, what Bob has done in his remarkable book is to take the time that those in daily journalism do not give themselves and should give ourselves, and apply the methodology that we learned in Watergate to some extent, and he can address this. But the result is a remarkable book that, again, gets us out of the darkness about Donald Trump and shows us this governing crisis, as Bob calls it.
So I do want to bring up the House lights just a little bit because I want to ask the audience a question. And so I want a show of hands. How many of you have actually read the Constitution? So about half. Okay. Because a lot of us talk about the Constitution, I know my rights, but not everybody's read the Constitution. And so I want to talk about the preamble, which is beautiful and poetic. So just kind of indulge me for just a moment. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And it's really as if our forefathers who developed this nation we call the United States of America thought of everything. And for those things that they didn't really think about, they had these little things called amendments. And so the First Amendment reads like this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And this really is the basis of our conversation with these two great, iconic journalists this evening. It really is. The role of the free press. Now, we call it the free press. I call it the free, independent, and professional media, because press is print, media is everything else. If the role of the real media is building and a building block of democracy, why is it important for us to micro-focus on the media and journalists right now? Is journalism in jeopardy?
I don't think it is. I agree with Carl. Look, it's going to be a battle, but the question, news is a product, and we have to make the product as good as possible. And I think the question on the table is, what do we know and what have we found out about Donald Trump and his presidency? And there are three things I found in 2 years of work for the book Fear. First of all, that the alarm by people closest to him is the greatest. And
The alarm closest to him.
alarmed about what Trump is doing. And Gary Cohn, who is the chief economic advisor, who was the president of Goldman Sachs, sees the documents on the president's desk, and he feels it's an emergency, and he takes them away, snatches them, and on a number of issues. And I've looked at presidents going back to Nixon. In Nixon's case, we never had Henry Kissinger sneaking in and taking documents off the president's desk. And what's astonishing is Trump, when you look at it, he had, how many people here have a to-do list each day? Most people, or you have it in your head. Trump doesn't have a to-do list. Trump he operates on impulse, and in this case, with Gary Cohn, he wanted to get out of the South Korean trade agreement, which could trigger all kinds of catastrophes in the military alliance and the top secret special access intelligence programs that really allow us to detect North Korean missile firings within 7 seconds. That is an immense advantage in a face-off or just the day-to-day with Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader. So you see that Trump is, in one of the other findings here from National Security Council meeting notes is Trump thinks all these alliances we have, like NATO, are we're suckers because we're paying for the defense of other countries. Literally, we are not, but we pay more than countries like Germany do.
Mm-hmm. So Bob, let's bring it back to journalism for a moment. And because of everything that you've discovered and everything that you have uncovered, and because the media is under attack, I mean, I do wonder, because if we are written into the First Amendment as something to be protected, and we are under attack, is our democracy under attack?
Well, our democracy is under attack. And incidentally, I think it's a mistake to look at Donald Trump as coming out of nowhere. The presidency of Donald Trump is also about America. His election is about America. People voted for him, and there are reasons that he won that have to do with the people of the country. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about the press and being under attack,
or the media,
we have systemic weakness in our democratic institutions in this country. And the Trump presidency has taken us to a different place, and Bob's book illustrates this. we have never had as a basic question, Nixon was a criminal president from the first day he took office till the day he left. That's what those tapes show us. We've never had a president of the United States whose fitness to be the president has been questioned so repeatedly by those closest to him who have watched him operate. Jim Mattis's lack of confidence in Donald Trump's ability to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. Mattis, Cohn, Tillerson, go on and on, McMaster, regard the President of the United States as a danger to the national security of the United States.
So how do journalists, so let me stop you there just for a second, because we're talking about this building block of journalism in democracy, and these are all very important things to know, but it's very difficult when journalists and journalism is under verbal attack and daily attack. So for instance, as a cub reporter, I was always taught to have balance in stories. But is there such thing as balance in truth? Isn't truth just truth?
Okay, I mean,
let's go to the, Bob and I have a phrase, and he'll pick up in a second here from me, called the best obtainable version of the truth.
Okay.
That's really what we're after.
The best obtainable version of the truth.
And that's partly about context. You can string together 5 facts, and it's not the truth. Mm-hmm. It's an amalgam of texture, fact, existential description, et cetera, that brings you the truth and people speaking. And when you talk about balance, the question of fair, if you have a bank robber and you got video of him going into the bank with his gun and saying to the teller, when they used to be tellers, give me all your money, give me all your money. And then his lawyer gets up and says, my client had nothing to do with this robbery. He was in the next county. You don't give him 50% of the story to talk about how he was in the next county. You describe what's in the video. That's the kind of fairness that and honesty that a story deserves. And you can take that analogy to the Trump presidency.
Yeah, and look, if I may, the question is, what do you find from the reporting? And what you do is listen to everyone. In the case of Mattis, now Mattis is central to understanding the Trump presidency. Anyone would say that. Secretary of Defense resigned in December and if you look at his resignation letter, the exact issues I describe in the book where he complained about Trump. But at one meeting, and this is something you go along and you do this for decades, and at times you run into something that really shocks you. And the NSC meeting, and Trump is complaining about this money that we're spending for military alliances. And he said, we're suckers. If we were smart, we would be so rich. And Mattis says to him, according to the notes, Mr. President, we are doing all of these things to prevent World War III. Now, what is job one of a president of the United States? As Trump says in a general abstract way, it is to provide for our security, and job one is to prevent World War III. And in that condition where somebody, Mattis, a former Marine general, somebody respected by everyone, has to tell the President of the United States, and this isn't the first week that Trump's in office, this is 1 year into the Trump presidency where he says this. Now, can you imagine, go back in time when Dick Cheney was Secretary of Defense, can you imagine him having to tell George Herbert Walker Bush, the president, when they're talking about NATO and military alliances, that Cheney would have to say, Mr. President, we're doing these things to prevent World War III. That is something to be alarmed about and worried about, and that's not a partisan judgment. That is a judgment based on what the duties and responsibilities of the President and the Secretary of Defense are. And we are kidding ourselves if we think, oh, this is just Trump being Trump.
Is the country sufficiently alarmed? Are reporters getting the story out enough, and are enough people believing it so that the country collectively is sufficiently alarmed?
Not our job. That really what our job is the best attainable version of the truth, and to get it out there. How that information is absorbed has to do with the larger culture, including the political culture of this country. And there are all kinds of difficulties, problems, et cetera, and there ought to be a lot of reporting, not just on the President of the United States, but on the realities of our culture. But it is certainly not our job to determine how that information is
received,
processed and received.
But we need to get that information out. And you're asking a good, how much of this is believed? I think in many cases it indeed is believed, and in lots of cases it is not. And part of that is the context of the media business and what we do. When Nixon resigned, Katharine Graham, who was the owner, publisher of the Washington Post, wrote Carl and I a personal letter. And she said, oh, you did some of the stories and now Nixon's gone. And then she said, don't start thinking too highly of yourselves. And then she went further and she said, let me give you two some advice. Beware the demon pomposity. Beware the demon pomposity. And it stalks the halls of the media, of politicians, of business. There's too much pomposity out there. And when reporters who are worked up, who have points of view either against Trump or for Trump,
or anything,
become emotionally unhinged, as Carl said, that's not our job. The job is to explain the facts, but we can't be in a position, and we found this in Watergate, where people said, oh, you shouldn't report that. You shouldn't let people know about this crime or this operation because, in a way, it's better if we don't know. Well, democracy, the whole foundation is we can stand to know. We have to know. And so there's going to be tension. It's going to be hard. I think in the end, the media will hold its ground, and as Ben Bradley, our editor in Watergate, said, the truth emerges.
and almost when you let light in, and when you let light in, it disinfects. So
You hope.
light disinfects.
You hope.
So these feel like, so I'm a former police reporter, and
So are we.
You got three former police reporters up there.
there was a time I wasn't sent out of the building unless someone was dead, dying, burning, or decomposing. And it was really dangerous work. I was caught in between gunfire twice. I was in direct contact with criminals. I mean, it was dangerous stuff. I don't know, about 25 years ago and easily 30 pounds ago. And it was dangerous stuff. And I'm not a police reporter anymore, but I can tell you that with many of my colleagues, we feel like no matter what we're reporting, whether it's investigative, whether it's daily news, education, flower shows, it feels dangerous. It's been dangerous all over the world to be a good
It's really dangerous all
journalist,
over
but
the world.
it's really dangerous all over the world.
And Trump has contributed to that by his attacks.
So
on
it's
the
not.
press.
So it's not our imagination. It feels dangerous to be a reporter right now.
Well, it's physically dangerous to be a reporter when tyrants, and I'm not going to call Donald Trump a tyrant here, but I'm talking about other places. When tyrants and despots use murderous techniques to deal with the press. But when you also create an environment such as Trump has created by continually attacking the legitimate function of the media and casting it as illegitimate. Look, Nixon in Watergate made the conduct of the press the issue. He tried to do it for a long time. He succeeded for a while, and then it didn't succeed. Trump has been very successful at making the conduct of the press an issue sufficient to motivate an awful lot of people in this country to believe that. All we can do is to continue to do the reporting. And it's the reporting, and we learned this in Watergate. And it does go to what you said a moment ago about light disinfecting or whatever. When the facts are out there, and Bradley's quote, it gives the opportunity, and when the truth, the best obtainable version is out there, and people can see that reporters have done their best to get the best obtainable version of the truth, then you've got a real shot that no longer will the conduct of the press be the primary issue. But look, it doesn't matter. We still have to do our job the same way.
And we shouldn't be defensive about it. And in a way, we have to be aware of what's going on, but we shouldn't become self-conscious about it, because that can become crippling. Oh my goodness, Trump is criticizing us. He's saying this and that. And look, we make mistakes, and when we make mistakes, you've got to step up to it. But you also can't shy away from looking at this metaphor of darkness. You have to take the flashlight out and get it in the dark corners at wherever they are. Now, one of the sensitive issues with Trump is Trump's lawyers. And he had for 8 months a lawyer named John Dowd, who worked intimately with Trump on the defense in the Mueller investigation. And Dowd actually, I found through reporting and documents and notes that Dowd literally took Trump through a practice session of how would you testify. And he found that Trump made things up, lied, and and said, if you go testify, you are going to wind up in an orange jumpsuit. That means in Michigan, people know what an orange jumpsuit is. And
I think that means Wayne County Jail.
okay, wherever. They're all around. And so he works with, and he says, I can't do this as a lawyer and sit next to you and have you testify because you're not a reliable witness. Now, and then he finally concludes, and I'll abbreviate, but he says the problem Trump has, he doesn't want to insult him, will not say to him, but his conclusion is, you're an effing liar. Now, that's not Nancy Pelosi. That's the president's own lawyer saying you are a liar and saying that you cannot testify. And that's somebody who resigned because Trump said earlier last year he was going to testify, and he said, I will not do it. I will resign first. Now, people have said to me, oh, well, isn't there a lawyer-client privilege? Isn't there some way? And yes, there is a lawyer-client privilege, but this is a fundamental element of understanding who Donald Trump is.
Let's talk about the lying for a minute, because I think the lying is essential to understanding the reporting on the Trump presidency. It's essential to understanding why we're under attack as we are, and it's essential to understanding why these people who work with Trump have said he is a danger to the country. And it sounds, when I go on the air, and I started saying he lies a year and a half ago.
Right, instead of myths, truths, and doesn't have a good relationship with the truth.
I found myself jumping back instinctively because it sounds pejorative to me from where I come from in news culture. But it's not pejorative. As Bob said at the beginning, his newspaper, which keeps the Pinocchio report going every day, has determined more than 8,000 lies. This is unheard of, and it is repertorial fact that it is unheard of in a president of the United States. Yes, presidents lie. Yes, heads of all kinds of institutions lie. This is something different. And so we have reported it as something different and as something dark, because it is dark by its very nature. And those who are Trump followers believe that we have done this because we have an agenda. And they refuse to accept that he lies. And not only that, many of them say the fact that we call him or say he lies, they say you're not being objective.
Okay, look, it's tricky, and you have
You've got to do it.
Yeah, you have to kind of get in an emotional state of, okay, I'm going to keep going for the story. I'm going to keep looking at the story. But Carl's right, and to Carl's credit, early in the Trump administration, he would go on CNN and he would say, he's lying. And a lot of people, including myself, quite frankly, would go, ooh, you know, that implies it's intentional, and we don't make judgments like that. We say it's untruth. But these things are really lies. And we can't, take it to the next level. And this is complex, but I think important. Why is Trump this way? Why does he respond to events in the way we've seen for the last 2 years? And one of the things, I mean, how many people here in the audience have been elected President of the United States?
Can we raise the lights? Show of hands.
Good. Okay.
Okay, no, somebody over there, you're a liar.
Right. Okay. Now, and trying to understand 9 presidents from Nixon to Trump, all of those people were elected, or in the case of Ford, appointed, and they became President of the United States. And that is a kind of self-validation that none of us are going to experience. For Trump, with his ego, he never held elective office, he never served in government, and so he is, hey, I'm here, I'm the man, I know best. And so he operates in a way that isolates him from his advisors, because they get in there and it's what George Kennan called the treacherous curtain of deference falls down. Oh yes, Mr. President, yeah. Mr. President. And so he is not getting the advice he needs, and he is going along, and you see it. I mean, talk to people who work for him in the closest way. They wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning and they, my God, has he tweeted something?
That's right.
So let's,
Or 6 a.m. Oh my God, is he tweeted? And they have no idea. It may be what they're in charge of. It may be in the, and it is just, it is organizational chaos. And the president has too much power for that to be used carelessly.
so let's shine the flashlight in another area, because I'm going to read this so that I don't get it wrong. 2018, Pew Research Center reported 68% of adults get at least some news on social media like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, right? For those of us who remember a world before the internet, I think that's most of us in the room, we got our news from very specific traditional sources, right? So we had network news, it's before cable. We didn't have streaming. We didn't have internet, Facebook, social media. But basically, anybody who's got a cell phone video camera and a Wix website building account can make themselves look like the real deal. They're not vetted, they're not professional. But my question is, how can the audience discern misinformation from the truth? Because there's so many entities out there saying, I'm media, blogs, vlogs, iPod, podcasts. I'm not I kind of know what a podcast is. I just aged
You
myself.
should.
I
You
should.
Should, because
Yeah.
some of them are very good, actually.
Yeah. But there's so many of them out there. How does the audience discern?
Right. You've raised the right question, but let's take it outside of just looking at Donald Trump or outside of just looking at quote, news. You got to look at we're part of a larger cultural environment in the media.
Okay.
And that cultural, I'd say, if you're going to really look at what's emblematic, without being too esoteric here, and it goes to what you're talking about, of our age, it's the selfie. Seriously. The idea that people are taking pictures of themselves, sending them out, creating their own movies, their own narratives. They're the stars of their own shows in ways that people were never empowered to be before, whatever this assertion of self is. And now it has permeated the, quote, media environment as well, in a toxic way, because of what you're talking about. That's not to say that the nostalgia that you express for the old is necessarily for something that was so great to begin with. I mean, I happen to believe that the internet is a great reporting platform, better than print in many ways. Infinite length, you can have stories go, graphics,
And they're there in
tables.
perpetuity.
Absolutely.
Come back to it.
Right. So I think the internet is a great reporting platform. But you have now, everybody gets to be a news producer, reporter, columnist, and believing that their work is deserving, I presume they believe this, or a lot of people, is deserving of great attention. And that is even before you get into nefarious construction, such as bots, et cetera, that are meant very deliberately to spread misinformation, disinformation.
So Carl, let me take it back to, how do you discern that if you don't have a particularly discerning eye? If you're just looking at social media, if you wake up in the morning and you're looking at Facebook and how do you discern?
I think it's terrible. I don't know the answer. I think it's a terrible problem.
This is, we're at a point that somebody in 100 years will write an analysis, and there'll be PhDs, and people will be able to unwind and explain what's going on. I think we just don't know. If I may ask, how many people here have seen the movie, the Robin Williams movie, Dead Poets Society? Oh, lots of people.
Wow.
Great. Robin Williams lives, and through his work, and it is a fabulous movie. Robin Williams plays a instructor at a boys' prep school, and it was about 25, 26 years ago it came out, and at one point they're in class, and the boys are there, and they all have coats and ties on. You know, it's a long time ago. And Robin Williams gets up on his desk, and he says, "I stand on my desk to remind myself that we need to, and I need to find new ways to think about things." And that is what we have to do with the media, business, politics. I mean, look at what's happened with Facebook and Google and Amazon and so forth. Individuals with a new way to think about things have changed our world. And somebody's going to figure it out about in the media, about all of the other things going on in business and so forth, but it kind of requires a form of patience we don't naturally have, because you ask Carl a question, it's fair. Well, what do? We don't know. And so if we don't know, if we don't understand the environment we're in, we've got to slow things down and figure out exactly who is our audience, who are we trying to meet and converse with, and it requires an awful lot of time and an awful lot of work. We aren't going to figure it out tonight.
Let me add one thing, that we need and are to be very rigorous, though, in our reporting about media, and particularly new media, and identify. We need to be doing investigative reporting on fake media, and
I agree, yeah.
and identifying it.
I agree.
And we're the only folks that have the ability to do it, as a matter of fact. Interpol is not going to do it except in extreme cases.
So let me challenge you for a moment, because we are some of our own worst enemies. And I know you're contributors for CNN. You're not the bosses there. But for instance, CNN, Wolf Blitzer's show starts every single day with breaking news and that heart-pounding music and that big graphic. And I got to tell you, breaking news is supposed to be stuff is happening right now, duck.
It's not. We were just talking about this in the green room, and I said to Bob, it's not just CNN. It's the Washington Post website. Today, breaking news.
But that's an erosion of the language. And, I mean, it took me a while to even figure out that that's just his standard open. It's not breaking news. Breaking news is crap just hit the fan. Breaking news isn't the president is working on a speech and Melania just got in the car. But here's my point. Here's my point. When we use those words, there is an erosion of urgency, and the audience starts going, we've got a smart audience. So we are degrading the language. I mean, we're words people. We're degrading the language ourselves.
It's a kind of consumer fraud, let's face it.
Yes, it
because it is.
Do you agree?
Yeah.
You're right. But again, never forget that journalism reporting is part of a larger culture and reflects the larger culture. And it always is going to reflect that larger culture.
And it is a consumer product.
The consumer fraud that Bob is talking about is systemic. And we're part of that system. You can't take us out of the equation altogether and say we're altogether immune and different.
Yeah. And you can't-
No, but look, you see breaking news and you
I
think,
agree with the
well,
point.
maybe it is true this time.
Right.
And
I
so
agree
you
with the
listen,
point.
and that's how you're hooked on it. There's no question about it.
So it does catch my, listen, and I work in the industry, and each time it's like breaking, hell, that's not breaking news. But anyway, listen, so I kind of created this little bit of game. I want to do word association. Okay, so I'm gonna throw out a word, and I want each of you with 1 or 2 words to very quickly respond. Okay?
1 or 2 words?
1 or 2 words, no bloviating.
Who are you kidding?
Bloviation-free zone. This is word association.
Okay, you're going to lose this.
Word association. Alternative facts.
Trump.
Unfair.
Fake news.
Kellyanne.
Hey, Stone.
I'm just playing a game.
I'm
just having fun.
Here's the Mueller investigation.
Oh, now there's something.
Serious business.
Okay,
Serious business, word association.
a mystery. A mystery. We don't know what he has. I'm sorry, I'm using more than a few words. But this is true. We were talking about this with the students. Somebody who works with Mueller. And this is
Now let me finish my game and then go.
No. Okay, we'll come back to the game. But this is so
Let him tell us.
revealing.
Okay, go. Okay.
It's so revealing. Somebody who worked Carl knows who this is, very intimately with Mueller, who runs the Russian Special Counsel investigation. I had known Mueller when he was FBI director, and he said, in one interview, he said, I like to get the texture and the substance of what's going on, and I want people to dig down and find the people in the organization who have day-to-day knowledge and responsibility, and that explains the sprawling nature of this. But then somebody who worked with, I said, what's he like? Because he doesn't hold press conferences, he doesn't go to court. He's Oz.
He's a sealed vessel.
And he said, Bob Mueller is the kind of person, if he discovers that you have ripped a mattress tag off, he will prosecute you. And they call him Bobby Mueller, the mattress tag prosecutor. And so, if Trump ever hears this, he'll say, see?
Witch hunt.
Witch hunt. Come to the White House. All the mattress tags are in place.
Okay, back to the game. Hashtag MAGA.
What?
Make America Great Again.
Oh. Bad hats.
It worked.
Fox News.
Roger Ailes.
One-sided.
Covfefe.
Kellyanne.
Do you guys remember Covfefe? That I think it was like a midnight tweet.
Yeah.
And it said C-O-V,
Right.
F-E-F-E, Covfefe. So this audience is filled with really incredible people. They're very thoughtful. They're paying attention. And so we asked people to send us questions in advance of this program, and we got fantastic questions. And so what I'd like to do is go through some of those questions, if I can actually find, the right page. Okay, question number 1, sorry, I just dropped my pen, blah, 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 blah. Here we go. All right, so we're gonna read these questions in no particular order, but they've not been edited, so they're exactly the way you sent these questions. We can have succinct answers. I wanna try to get to as many of these questions as possible because these are the questions that the audience sent in. And the first question was, if Trump is indicted and found guilty of one or more of his charges against him, like treason, collusion with Russia, tampering with election, threatening witnesses, laundering money, violating campaign finances law, perjury, etc., after Congress censures and pillories him, so who in the audience knows what the word pillories is? Okay, all right, well, that means at least 17 of you could have written this question, which basically means hold it to public ridicule or perhaps put into stockades or something like that. Is it possible that his appointments, Supreme Court, federal judges, his nullified agreements, Paris Climate Accord, intermediate range nuclear force, Iran nuclear sanctions, et cetera, all of his disastrous decisions about releasing parcels of national park lands for exploitation, additionally permitting offshore drilling to proceed.
It's quite a question, I have to say.
It was the first question. In other words, if
Could be
he's
the
found
last if you don't
guilty
get to
of
the end.
one or more of those charges, can all of these be annulled?
Annulled?
First of
I think
all,
they're saying is if he's found to be illegitimate.
No, absolutely not. I mean, you can't, the appointees to the Supreme Court were confirmed, and they're there.
let's establish right now, Donald Trump is the legitimate president of the United States, like it or not.
Yeah, that's right.
The Electoral College has said he is the president. That's it.
Yeah.
And the acts that he undertakes as president are legal until the Supreme Court or others, if the Supreme Court says they're not legal, or he is impeached for or convicted.
So
But it
that
doesn't
means-
undo the
Yeah, but that question is from somebody who's very angry.
It's from at least one of 17
Yeah,
people who
okay,
raised their
well,
hand
okay,
who
and-
know what the word pillory means.
And Carl is absolutely right. I mean, he is the president. See, we lose sight of how much power presidents have.
We haven't even talked about what he's done. He has done much of what he said he was going to do, and he has done big things. And the question is reflective of the fact that he has done big things.
This
What
is
he's
somebody who's
done-
thinking about this, though, and I think that's a question some people may have. And so hopefully,
the answer is a narrow legal one.
and
No.
so the person who knows what the word pillory meant, I hope that you got the answer to your question. Okay, second question was, I'd like to know their thoughts on Roger Stone.
Did you hear him the other night when he said he's writing a book about us? Did hear
About
that?
you and I?
Yeah,
Oh, no?
yeah.
Well, because, see, he was
He already-
19, and he was part of the kiddie spy corps.
That's right.
In Watergate.
That's right.
They recruited people to spy on the Democratic presidential candidates. When it got around to writing all the president's men, we didn't even include him. And I think this is part of this culture Carl's talking about, of self-focus and, wow, I'm going to be famous because I'm indicted, because I was once a friend with Trump. I was going to do a TV show the other night, and I said, I'm happy to come on as long as you don't ask about Roger Stone. I think we should have had the same agreement here.
Okay, so next question. What should regular citizens like us do about the state of affairs in our government today? Is there anything we can do that would make a significant difference?
What,
What was that? No? Did you say no? Oh, vote. Okay, let's move on to the next question.
No, but there is.
We can go home now.
We're talking about, tune in to what's going on and vote and get. Look, we've lost. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. But you know, you're right, because here's the thing. News is hard to listen to, and I hear so many people say, I can't do it. And I say, you've got to. As hard as it is, turn to Spa Radio for a few minutes, but you've got to get back to news. You've got to know.
We lose. I mean, this is what, when I have the luxury of time to try to do books and take a long run at things, we run by things. The election last year in the House of Representatives was a perfect poll. There are never perfect polls, but this was one, and 40 seats shifted, almost 10% of the House. And that is a
That was a way they made. That was a way to make a difference.
yeah, that is what happened. Now,
That is
I
the way
think
to make a
for the next 2 years, the Democrats in the House are going to be very frustrated because Trump still has 5/6 of the government. But I think what happened in 2018 could be a giant foreshadowing of what's going to happen in 2020.
I love this next question. And like I said, people were very, very thoughtful. What is your perspective on WikiLeaks and free speech that affects national security? Isn't that a great question? That is a great, who wrote that question? I want to know who that person, that's a great question.
Well, it's interesting that a number of people, including Roger Stone, might claim, there certainly are others who are claiming it in the Mueller investigation, that whatever dealings they may have had with WikiLeaks, that WikiLeaks is a news organization that's protected under the First Amendment. And it's an interesting defense because whatever the biases of WikiLeaks, and unless it is really found and determined that it is absolutely a wholly owned subsidiary of a state, it might be eligible, or someone might be eligible for protection under the First Amendment for his or her dealings with WikiLeaks. I don't know where you come down on that. I want to raise one other quick, really important fact about Donald Trump and the press. He is a creation of the press. The New York and here is where, go back, where we have really fallen down, one area in the press, is as part of the best obtainable version of the truth, and particularly in the campaign, to, in all of cable news during the campaign with all that airtime, there was not a single investigative or real biography on any of the cable news channels about any of the candidates, whether it was Hillary, Donald Trump, no matter how well known they were, not a single one. But if you look at the really extensive biographical literature on Donald Trump, it's very clear that the New York tabloids, the New York Daily News and the New York Post, really is how Trump made Donald Trump, his manipulation of the press. And he loves the press. He loved the press when we were, myself included, Bob, others, reporting rather toughly on Hillary Clinton's server. He didn't have any problem about fake news then. And I think we need to go back and maybe make this part of our reporting, combining. We need to make use of history a little better in our contextual reporting.
But in 1980s, you called me up once and said Trump had just come out with his first book, The Art of the Deal. And Carl said, look at this, it's a giant bestseller, Trump's here. And
this is from a dinner I was at.
Okay, but then you said, we've got to interview Trump. And yes, you did.
No, Trump.
Yes, you did.
The part of the story is Trump came up to me and said, wouldn't it be great if Woodward and Bernstein interviewed Donald Trump? That's,
and you took the hook.
That's right.
And
That's exactly
you called me
right.
up and said, we've got to interview Donald Trump. This is 1986, 87 sometime.
Don't you want to just be
and I
sitting
said,
around
who's Donald Trump? But you said, and your sniffer is better than anyone's in the world. You said, this guy is really interesting. So we went up and interviewed him
Trump
for an
Tower.
hour and taped it. And we lost the tape.
He lost it. He lost the tape.
Really? I mean, it's like we have our own Rosemary Woods. Not just 18 and a half. And so when a couple of years ago I interviewed Trump, he said, I remember when you and Carl came up, and that was such a great interview. And I said, I'm offering $1,000 to anyone who finds the goddamn tape.
Don't you really want to be just sitting in a sunroom and having Sunday coffee, just listening to these guys go back and forth with each other? Okay, let's get back. A couple more questions. Another great question. And I'm editorializing, but I think it's a great question. So I said I think it's a great question. As we have fewer newspapers and you guys were just talking about this. If we have fewer newspapers and investigative reporting, how do we engage the under 30 generation to seek out and read reputable news sources other than bots and Facebook? Or is it not our problem as journalists?
Buy a better product. Buy a credible, detailed product. I'm sorry but the book I did Fear has sold 2 million copies. That's 4 times of what All the President's Men sold when it first came out. It's not me, it's Trump. People want to know what Trump is up to and what he has done. And I have had young people who've come up and said, oh, I read that book. Because it details what his actions are. It takes you to meetings. And it also, in many, many cases, shows Trump asking some really good questions about Afghanistan and North Korea and so forth.
But in general, how do we engage younger people to seek out true sources of vetted, responsible, and professional news? And not just young people, actually. I think that should be everybody.
That person who wrote the first question.
All right.
Okay, I want to tell one story, which
Yes.
Okay, can I tell a story?
Absolutely.
Because this is an illustration of how you try to get this best obtainable version of the truth, and you can get the facts, but you may miss the meaning of what's going on, what's right before you. And it was September 1974. Gerald Ford was president. Nixon had resigned the month before, and Ford went on television and announced he was giving Nixon a full pardon for Watergate. And I was asleep, and Carl called me up and woke me up, and Carl can say what happened in the fewest words with the most drama. And have you heard? And I said, I was asleep, I haven't heard. And Carl said, I'm quoting him now, the son of a bitch pardoned the son of a bitch. I really felt good because I was able to get it. And so at the time, we thought, this is the final corruption of Watergate. Nixon gets a pardon, Trump gets the presidency. There was an aroma of a deal. We suspected a deal. We wrote stories about, the
possible deal.
Shenanigans going on to pressure Ford to give the pardon. But absolutely sure this is corrupt. I would have at the time in '74 staked my life on it. 25 years later, I undertook one of my book projects, Shadow, about the legacy of Watergate in the presidencies of Ford through Clinton. And I called Ford up and said, I'd like to talk to you about the pardon. Never interviewed Ford, never met him. There was a poster in the newsroom of the Washington Post in which they had a picture of Gerald Ford with a thought bubble saying, and it was put up by when we had a classified ads department in the Post. You remember that?
I got my job
And
through the Washington Post.
it said, I got my job through the Washington Post. shameless, and somebody had the wisdom to take the damn poster down. So, Ford, I want to talk to you about the pardon. Turned out Ford was the most open person I'd ever met in government, quite frankly. And I did 6 or 7 interviews with him, luxury of time, 2 full-time assistants, all the legal memos, the memoirs, the magazine articles, the news coverage, and kept peeling, what happened? Why did Ford give Nixon this pardon? Last interview with Ford at his home in Rancho Mirage, California, tape recordings going for history. And I asked him, I said, why did you pardon Nixon? And he smiled and said, you keep asking that question. And I said, I don't think you have answered it fully. And to my astonishment, he said, you're right. I have not told anyone this story, including my wife, Betty. And he said, here's what happened. A week before Nixon resigned, Al Haig, Nixon's chief of staff, came to me, Ford's talking, and said, if you agreed to pardon Nixon, you will get the presidency, and he will resign. And I'm sitting there saying, holy shit, there was a deal. And I said, there was a deal. And then Ford exploded. This was not a man who, from Michigan here, was quite even tempered, exploded and said, there was no deal. And then he did one of these things it doesn't happen. He did a complete mind entry. He said, let me tell you what happened. I became president. I never wanted to be president. And for 30 days, every question, every piece of business was about Nixon. What's going to happen with Nixon? What about Watergate? What about the tapes? On and on. He said, I had to end it somehow. The economy was in trouble. The Cold War was in full tilt. He said he had a letter from Leon Jaworski, the Watergate prosecutor, saying, now that Nixon is a private citizen, he's going to be investigated because of the power of evidence on the tapes. He surely will be indicted, tried, convicted, probably go to jail. So Ford said, we are going to have 2 or 3 more years of Watergate. And he said in this plaintive voice, I'll never forget, I needed my own presidency. The country had to move on. So I preemptively pardoned Nixon in what I thought was the national interest. The Kennedy Library, Caroline Kennedy, the daughter of JFK, called and said, we're going to give Gerald Ford the Profiles in Courage Award, named after John F. Kennedy's book, Profiles in Courage, of about 8 politicians who sabotaged their own career in the national interest. I did not go to the ceremony, but there was Ford somewhat vindicated, and I'm watching that, and I have to be honest here, what a cold shower. I was sure it was corruption. You look at it through a neutral lens 25 years later, and what I was sure was corruption turns out to be the exact opposite. Courage. You cannot humiliating, humbling, and you cannot have that experience in our business and not pause in the instant judgments when somebody calls you and says, the son of a bitch, pardon the son of a bitch.
I'm struck by your memories. I don't remember what I had on yesterday unless I look on my bathroom floor. And so the fact that you can remember dates and times, I think we have time for one more of our audience. I love this question too, because I thought it was really, really very sweet. So again, just the way it came in. I had the privilege and pleasure of working as a copy aide at the Washington Post from 1985 to 1987, At the time, typewriters had just been pried from the desks, and email was brand new. Every morning, I would deliver newspapers from across the country to reporters' desks, called for bicycle couriers to go out to get press releases and other source information for stories, spent most of my days sorting letters in copy aid station and slinging them into a grid of mailboxes along the walls, ran to the storage room every morning to get D batteries for Joe Bouchard's police scanners, and we all came in on our off hours to watch cable television and use company Watts line, blah, 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 blah. He's got 3 questions. 4, actually. Is there still a copy aid station? What do copy aids do? How many are there? And more importantly, is there room for an alumni hire?
You go.
Well,
I'm going to start with, is there room for an alumni hire? Turn up the light. Who wrote that? Who wrote that? There he is, right there. Give him a round of applause, right here. You know him?
no, but what he's described, I mean, I'm trying to struggle to write a memoir about how fabulous it was to be a copy boy. That's how I started. And the thrill of getting up every day and being in the middle of the news, and these fabulous characters in the newsroom who were older than I was. And the epitome of being a reporter, you know, you were talking about covering police headquarters, and I think about Trump, and I think about Nixon, and I think about, we're always asked about the 2. And the commonality that I see in the 2 experience, there are very, very big differences that you could talk about all night, including the intellects of the 2 individuals, but their attitudes toward the press were the same. And there came a point when we wrote a crucial story in mid-September of 1972 about a secret fund that had been controlled by 5 people close to the President of the United States.
Close to Nixon. This
right,
is Watergate.
Right.
Yeah.
Including John Mitchell, the Attorney General of the United States, who had been Nixon's law partner. And we wrote this story that was unprecedented. And on that day in the newsroom, off the newsroom floor, Woodward and I would have coffee every day. And I put a dime in the coffee machine, which is what coffee cost then. And I literally felt a chill.
It was overpriced.
That's right. And I felt literally a chill. I've never felt this since or before go down my neck. And I said to Woodward, oh my God, this president's going to be impeached. And this was 2 years before it happened. And Woodward looked at me and he said, oh my God, you're right. And we can never use that word impeach around this newsroom because we don't want anybody here to think that we have an agenda beyond reporting the story.
Wow.
And we didn't. And we were about to write that day the story that said that John Mitchell, while Attorney General of the United States, the highest law enforcement officer in the land, had controlled a secret fund that paid for undercover activities, including the Watergate break-in, against the Democratic opposition, and that the president's law partner, Attorney General, had controlled this secret fund. And wrote the story, it went into the paper, we called the White House, as we often did, for a response, and I got an assistant press secretary, read him the story. He said, the sources of the Washington Post are a fountain of misinformation. Used typewriters, I typed that out. And I said, well, aside from this geyser going off in our backyard, is the story true? Did Mr. Mitchell control this secret fund that paid for these activities against the Democrats? The sources of the Washington Post are a fountain of misinformation, he repeated. Well, I had a phone number for John Mitchell where I thought I could get him in New York. Called him up on the phone, he answered. And I said, Mr. Mitchell, we got a story in tomorrow's paper and I want to read you and get your response to. And he said, go ahead. And I got as far as John N. Mitchell, while Attorney General of the United States, controlled a secret fund and he said, Jesus. And then I got a few more words in, and John N. Mitchell, our Attorney General of the United States, controlled a secret fund that paid for. He said, Jesus. Got to the end of this first paragraph of the story and said, Jesus Christ, all that crap, you're putting it in the paper. If you print that, Katie Graham, referring to Katharine Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post, is going to get her tit caught in a big fat ringer. And I kind of instinctively jumped back from the phone, a little more worried about my parts than Mrs. Graham's at the moment.
Wow, that's a visual.
And then he said, there was a pause on the phone, and he said, and when this story is over, we're going to do a little story on you two boys. And he hung up the phone. And it was about as chilling a moment. Bob and I were 28 and 29 at the time. And about as chilling a moment as I can ever remember experiencing in reporting. And I called Ben Bradley, the editor of the Post, and told him what Mitchell had said. And Bradley said, do you have notes? Did he really say that? He said that about Mrs. Graham? And he said, yeah, I got all the notes.
That's what he got out of that.
And Bradley said, all right, run it all in a paper, but leave out her tit. The next morning, Mrs. Graham came down and said, Carl, do you have any more messages for me?
That's that whole, I want to be there when you guys just have coffee and talk.
Okay,
But there's a
see,
serious point.
Yes.
And that is what Mitchell intended, which was to intimidate the press.
Exactly.
And that's where we are today. And that's the intent of what we're witnessing today. And the way to respond to it is the way the Washington Post responded, to do the reporting and keep doing this.
And when we made a mistake.
That's right.
That's a great story.
But tell about the mistake.
Yeah.
Because it's very relevant given the BuzzFeed story
we made a mistake about attribution, about Haldeman, who was the top aide, about a secret fund and grand jury testimony, and it's all in the movie version. It's all in the book, and very, very painful for us.
But we made a mistake.
We made a mistake, and so Bradley, again, this is why it's nice to have veterans as your boss, who've been around the track many times, and he said, well, is it true, is it untrue? And we were a little unsure. It was true, and Haldeman, Nixon's chief of staff, went to jail for exactly what we had said in the story, but attribution, there was no grand jury testimony about this because they didn't ask, which tells you how weak the investigation was. So we're going around, you and I are talking about resigning. Our stomachs are jumping. We don't, as I say, we don't even know what part of our body our stomachs are in. And Bradley is sitting there kind of cool. He said, what? And everyone's asking for a statement, all the New York Times, all the other press. And Ben writes out, we stand by our story. And that was it. And there was something about his surrounding us and comforting us, but also kicking us in the ass because when he realized we made the mistake, he said, Jesus Christ.
But the
sounded
mistake,
like Mitchell.
But he understood the mistake that we made was a careless mistake about attribution, not about the fact that Haldeman had controlled this fund. But we indeed had made a mistake, and it cost us dearly.
Yes, and it was a giant credibility issue for a long time, rightly so. But it was Bradley. Can I tell one real quick story? Okay.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
So my bosses say we have an out time, but if you guys can stay a few extra minutes, tell your story.
Okay, good. Real quick. So they're making a movie of All the President's Men, Dustin Hoffman, Robert Redford, and the great director Alan Pakula. They're sitting around and they're saying, who are we going to get to play Ben Bradley? And they had known Jason Robards from Broadway, but this was a bad time. This is 1975, a bad time for Jason Robards. He was a drunk. He'd been in an automobile accident. But they said, let's get him in. And they called him in, gave him the script, and said, we'll pay you $50,000 to play Bradley, because they're really alike. It's like they were separated at birth. And so, oh, $50,000, great, give me the script. And he goes home, comes in the next day, and they say, so, what do you think? You going to do it? And Robart said, no, I can't play Bradley. And why can't you play Bradley? He said, well, I read the script. Well, what's wrong with the script? Well, all Bradley does is run around and say, where's the fucking story? And they say, that's what the editor of the Washington Post does. And Robart said, okay, oh, okay. And then they said, look, all you have to do is find 15 different ways to say, where's the effing story? And if you've seen the movie, that's what happened. And he won the Academy Award for playing Bradley.
We're just about on time. One last question. 30 years, 40 years from now, how will history judge journalists today?
The great thing about being a reporter is you don't have a crystal ball, and it's not part of the job.
Yeah, but that judgment, it's going to be mixed, because some of it's good, some of it's not good, but it's a really important question, and we shouldn't be overly concerned, but we have to be concerned, and the answer is better work, better product, and listen to our bosses and editors when they say, where's the effing story?
These two gentlemen have had a very long day. They flew in from New York and Washington, D.C., so their arms must be exhausted. Some of these I just do for me. It's past my bedtime, too.
You're good at it.
But I can't thank you enough. And I hope that this gave you thought fodder. I hope that it allows you to think and wonder and ask more questions of your journalists. But right now what I want to do is I want to thank the iconic and the legendary Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, or Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, for joining us this evening.
Good job.